Okay, we're now being recorded. So I guess with that, we will begin our meeting and can be joined in progress with others. So yes, we're now over 40. Welcome, fellow squires, to our, this happens to be our 8th virtual meeting, first one being in August. Just quickly, because there are a few new guests, very fast, a couple of housekeeping items. As I indicated, it's being recorded, this meeting. I would ask everybody at this time to mute themselves. Hit on the mute button in the lower left corner of your screen to prevent any unwarranted background noise.
Winnie.
I'd like you all, pardon me? And I'd like you all, if you can, to stay on your video as you are, the picture view, and you hit on the gallery view if you want to see everybody. And for questions, between Morris and Tom, when they get to that presentation, however they work it out, Morris may probably be calling on people. You can get in the queue to ask questions by hitting on participants is one. And then you'll notice on the right-hand column, a little column will come up with all the participants' names. You find your name, you click on that, and then in the bottom corner of that screen, you'll find a little hand sticking up. You click on that, and that means you have a question, your hand is raised, and they will be asked in the order in which they are received. If for some reason you had a difficulty in doing that, you can always use the chat function at the bottom. Okay, with that, I'd like to start the meeting by calling on Paul Bidwell, who has agreed to give our words of inspiration today. Paul?
Okay. While we enjoy the comfort around us in this amazing part of the world, let us remember how blessed we are to have enough to eat, clothing to wear, and adequate shelter. Further, let us be grateful for those blessings and, when possible, help others not so blessed.
Amen.
Thank you so much, Paul. Appreciate it. Oh, I got to get back down to. So with that part of the program, I'd like to, once I get going here. Now, we have at today's meeting, we're going to have 3 new guests. So I'd like to call on their sponsors one at a time. So the first one, I'll go in alphabetical order. Walter, I'll call on you to introduce your guest.
Thank you. My guest today is Tom Dornbach, our next door neighbor here in Naples, Florida. Tom is a retired executive from a large computer manufacturer with primary offices in Chicago and Japan. Tom went to DePaul University for his undergraduate studies and the University of Chicago for his MBA. During his working years, he headed a department with more than 400 people reporting to him. The company's Japanese connection had him traveling back and forth from Chicago to Japan more than 55 times. Tom and his wife Alice foster and train service dogs. There have been 10 of them in the past years. They live in Michigan during the summer and Naples during the winter. But most important, Tom's an avid and superb freshwater fisherman. Together we chase largemouth bass in the Naples ponds, and we welcome Tom to the meeting.
Thank you. Welcome, Tom. Is Tom there?
If
Yes.
you go to the gallery, you'll find him.
Yes.
I want to thank for opportunity to join your meeting today. I really appreciate that. And I just wanted everybody to know that I only had to send Walter $10 to get that introduction.
I see.
A bargain.
Sorry, oh, would you?
Oh, answer it.
Hold on a second.
How are you?
Sorry, that's part of the unwanted background noise I was talking about. I apologize. So Let me find Mike Keene. Where are you, Mike?
Mike Kahn.
Mike Kahn. What did I say? Keene. I'm looking at Gary Keene. Sorry. Mike.
That's okay.
I've done that before. There you are, Mike. Okay, Mike, you're on.
Thank you. So my guest today is Lou Bada. Lou is a New Londoner. Lou is a volunteer director of emergency management for the town of New London. He retired in September 2011 from the Department of Homeland Security's Federal Emergency Management Agency, where he was director of Business Management Division, Recovery Directorate assigned to the FEMA headquarters office in DC. Prior to his tour as division director, he was federal coordinating officer for one of a group of senior federal officers who, following a presidential disaster or emergency declaration, are individually appointed to represent the president as a deployed senior federal official dealing with state, local communities and volunteer agencies in a specific disaster. Lou headed operations in 14 major presidential disasters, including Hurricane Isabel in Virginia, major tornado in Xenia, Ohio. He was also headed the long-term recovery function in Louisiana following Hurricane Katrina. Lou is a cohort in the National Preparedness Leadership Initiative at Harvard University and was a 2010 Senior Executive Fellow at the Kennedy School of Government, Harvard University. Lou was born in Cuba, grew up in Bridgeport, Connecticut, and graduated from St. Michael's College in Vermont before receiving a commission in the Air Force, ROTC. He has 22-year military career, involved posts in 30 countries, serving as staff liaison between the U.S. Air Force Chiefs of Staff and Air Force commanders in 17 Latin American countries, and the head of the U.S. Air Force mission to Colombia. He's active in sports, and prior to moving to New London, served as commissioner of the Arlington County, Arlington County, Virginia Financial Affairs Committee for 3 years, helping draft, scrub, and oversee $1 billion county budget. An accomplished skier, runs marathons, advanced open water diver, holds his FAA commercial pilot certificate, and he is the secretary of the New London Rotary Club and its past president. He is also a life member of both the Order of Daedalians, which I have no idea what that is, and the Air Force Association. He is currently a volunteer of the New London Council of Aging and also a volunteer mountain ambassador at Mount Sunapee Ski Area. And Lou lives in New London with his husband, Bill Hickey. So with that, I know I saw Lou is on here. So Lou, do you want to say anything?
No, I
Don't
see.
forget
Actually, yeah, I see a few friendly faces that I already know. So thank you very much for the introduction, and looking forward to be a good listener.
Okay,
you.
good, Lou, and welcome.
Thank you.
Okay, next, I want to call on Sandy, Sandy Samela. Am I saying that right, Sandy? Where are you, Sandy? Are you here? I wonder if Sandy.
He's here. I saw him a few minutes ago.
Yeah, I'm
there he
here.
is. There you are,
Now
Sandy.
now I can be heard. Thank you. Thanks, Joe, for the opportunity to say a few words about my guest, Jeff White. Let me begin by saying Jeff and I go back many, many years. We were both students at Bowdoin College back in the mid-'60s. While Jeff was a class ahead of me and we were in different fraternities, we were both athletes there. He played football and I was a soccer player. Since Bowdoin was, and still is for that matter, a very small school, most of the athletes knew each other. 52 years later, we unexpectedly crossed paths at an AIL course at Colby Sawyer. Jeff was living in Alexandria, New Hampshire at the time and enjoyed coming down to the college to take various courses. Since our reconnection at AIL, he and his wife Jane have since become New London residents. Jeff's career spans 46 years in hospital administration and healthcare consulting. Over that time, he has held a number of management positions, including president and CEO of 2 community hospitals, one in New Hampshire, one in Maine. In 1992, he became a principal at Helms & Company, which is a healthcare management and consulting firm based in Concord. While there, he served as interim CEO for 4 community hospitals, including our own New London Hospital, where he was the one who passed the baton to Bruce King in 2003. In 2019, Jeff was recruited out of retirement to take a 4-month interim CEO position at the Copley Hospital in Vermont. Since that assignment, he has firmly recommitted to retirement. Jeff enjoys playing golf, reading, travel, and connecting with family and friends. Hopefully, he'll be doing most of these in the near future. Jeff, are you with us this afternoon?
I am.
Would
I
you-
am. Can you hear me?
I
I'm
can
delighted to be here.
Good.
Thanks very much.
Did everybody get to see Jeff? I don't know. Where's Jeff White?
Right up here,
Oh, there you are, Jeff. Just a quick, hello, here you are.
I'm
and-
right next to you, Joe.
Gotcha. Oh, well, good to see you and welcome.
Thank you.
Okay, well now, gentlemen, we've got, I believe the four new members.
You know what?
So I will introduce the
Here, but can't get the pictures back.
sponsors. And they've already gone through their bios, so we will not go through that, just a welcome to the organization. So David Belfort, are you here today?
I am here. And I'm happy to be sitting with my brother-in-law and next door neighbor, Barry Bradford. Barry is, as I said last time, retired from the Air Force after 22 years, flew commercial aircraft for a number of years afterward. And he's quite active these days in Habitat for Humanity and other local organizations in the community. And I am pleased to bring him before consideration of the membership for a membership of his own. And hopefully he will enjoy Squires as much as I have.
Okay, thank you and welcome. I've just welcome Barry. I've just been given a note that for some unbeknown reason I deleted Paul Bidwell from our meeting and he can't get back on. So
Just pause a moment.
I'm going to pause this just a second. I don't know how I can retrieve someone who I never realized I could delete someone.
Ask if anybody knows.
Does anybody know how to get someone back in? Apparently he says he can't sign back on. Oh, that's a shame.
Give him a phone call.
What?
Yep. Give him a phone call.
We did.
He just called us.
Here, click on there and see what the options are.
Let me see if I can find him in one moment.
Tell them to try to start all over again from the link.
We did. We can't.
We did. Well, I'm just going to take 1 second to run down here to see if I can find his name in the participant column. And if I can, I'll just click on it and call him back. That's a first, so I am not familiar with this situation. It always has to be something. Let me know if you see his name come up. Paul Bidwell. I haven't seen it, have you? Rats. Oh, that's a shame. I'll have to send him the recording of the meeting, but that's just too bad. Let me just go all the way down here. Okay, I guess, oh, I don't know how that happened. That's the first time. I didn't realize I could delete people.
It's under more.
He can probably still come in via the phone, his own phone on the phone link. It would be my guess.
Okay, I'll call him.
If you go to settings and it's on the chat bar, and there's a thing that allows you to manage blocked users. Because if you block them by mistake, he's never going to be able to join any meeting.
Okay, so if I do under settings, do you know where that is, Brenda?
Settings and then chat.
Right, I see chat. I don't see settings.
No, it's under the settings. I don't have the menu that you do, but and it'll show the blocked. It's manage blocked users, and you can unblock them.
There's no settings that I can see.
Did you go under security?
Would it be under security,
Well, just go
maybe?
try it.
Well, I don't want to delete the whole meeting or something.
You're not
No. Yeah, he could join via phone, but his IP address in the computer is probably blocked if by any chance that happened by mistake.
All right, well, I don't want to take an awful lot more time. I'll tell you what, Brenda, call him, tell him to try that, and if it doesn't work, assure him that geez, I apologize, and we'll get him a recording today. Yeah,
You could invite his wife and have him use his wife's credentials too.
yeah.
Hey, Joe,
Yes,
do you have a green shield and a check mark in your very upper left part of your screen?
I do.
Click on that. It's meeting information. And if you click on that, there's a settings wheel in the upper right.
There's a settings. Settings comes on.
There, I don't know. I'm getting you to settings. After that, I don't know where this unblock is.
There's a chat thing there.
I can't see the screen, honey, or I could help.
Did you say to hit chat once I get into settings?
No.
Okay.
I don't know. Once you get to settings, I don't know where the unblock is.
Yeah, the instructions say there's a meeting tab, and under in meeting, verify allow removed participants to rejoin is enabled.
Screen sharing, videos, audio overall. General video, audio, share screen, chat, background and fillers, recording, profile, statistics, keyboard statistics, accessibility. I'm gonna have to move on. I'm sorry. But anyway, Barry, you got a lot of extra video time here that was unintended. Welcome.
Well, thank you.
I apologize. I'm going to try to move on now. I'm sorry. Gee whiz. Okay, so Mark Friedman. Are you here?
I am here.
There you are. Let's see if I can do this halfway right. Okay, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Mark.
So I have two new members to introduce. Stephen Priest, who I see on the screen, who's here, and I'm going to let him speak for himself. And Al Peterson, who I don't see. Are you here, Al?
Well, Joe said if he can't get you on.
Apparently not. Steve, can you introduce you? I introduced both these new members last time. Steve.
Yeah, we just need to have him say a quick hello because we've already gone through that. We just like to say hello and welcome aboard.
Hello, everybody. I am very proud to be a member of the Squires. Have a great day. I'm interested in the speaker.
Well, thanks. We all are, and welcome aboard. Okay, there's one other. Art, do you want to introduce your new member? If I can find Art Rosen.
Okay, I've just unmuted myself. I join with Gary Keene today in proposing Russ Coleman as a member. He was introduced as a guest last week. Some of you may remember that he's had two careers. One was with the United States Navy, which he spent with the submarine service for some 10 years. And that was followed by Storm Ruger here in Newport. He is a member of the Newberry Veterans Committee and the U.S. Navy Birthday Committee, lives in Newberry with his wife, Derry, and together they have a blended family of many grandchildren from two previous marriages. It's a great pleasure to introduce him. He should be in South Carolina now. I hope he is watching. If he is, please come on, Russ, and say hello to everyone.
Hi, I'm here. I'm happy to be here. And yes, we are down in South Carolina. Weather's beautiful at this time, and I'm looking forward to
South Carolina, and there are many other things to do. So he will be with us, and
yeah, we're in South Carolina right now. We'll be till the end of the month, and happy to be part of the group here, and looking forward to the presentation today. So thank you very much, Art and Gary, for your sponsorship. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you and welcome, Russ.
Thank you.
I'm slow with this finger thing. Okay, just a quick little bit of an overview here. At this point in time, I hope you've all had at least your, oh, you know, I wonder if that's Paul coming in. Excuse me, I got a chat thing going on. I'm gonna see what happens.
No, the chat has nothing to do with
Okay.
it.
Oh, all right, he was explaining how to do that, sorry. So at this point in time, I hope everybody's had at least their first shot, if not their second. At the conclusion of this meeting, I have asked Paul Etkind to give us a rundown, our resident epidemiologist, as to where we think we're going as a group, who will also bring into play the status of the venue, which is Forbes Tavern, where we meet, and when we think we might be available to hold in-person meetings. And hopefully after today's debacle, it won't be too long down the line. I'd like to, at this point in time, call on John Bellis. Are you there, John?
Sure am.
And John, I've asked to give us a quick rundown on where we stand with our dues and where we are at total membership. Go ahead, John.
Okay, I'll be very quick. So we have I'll use the term active names in our current listing. In other words, after we've taken people off the list for various reasons, we have 131 active names. 114 are members, and of the members who have paid, and that includes 12 new members in this current fiscal year, which I think is pretty remarkable given COVID. So 114 have paid, and that includes 12 new members. 10 have not paid. We sent a letter following up to those that we couldn't reach, and Mark Friedman and Paul Rucci, the membership committee, have done a great job reaching out to people, and that's helped a lot. And I sent a letter because in some cases we couldn't reach them through their phone anyway. And I picked up 4 checks today. So we were at 14 unpaid, now we're down to 10. Just not sure what their status is, but we may still hear from some of them. And we've got 7 pending members, although I think at the end of the meeting, we'll have 3 pending members because we'll have 4 more new members that just got reintroduced. And of the 7 pending members, 4 already paid their dues. So I think we're doing quite well.
Well, great. Thanks, John, for that update. I appreciate it. In fact, I'd like to just take a moment to thank the whole staff here, because this is not a one-man show. And for example, John Bellis, he's done an awful lot in the background. Our treasurer backed up
Somebody's
by,
trying to get in.
I don't know how we do that. Someone's ringing me to try to get in. I think that's probably Paul. I don't know. Either that or it's the friendly ice cream man coming by. Can you hear that ringing?
Yes, we can.
Well, I'm going to, anyway, I want to proceed on here with, I want to thank John Bellis and what all he's done. Also, he's come up with a lot of innovative programs that we're going to be using now, especially when we get back online. We've also his backup, John Lyons. Bill Helm, our secretary, he continues to make the minutes, and which are being recorded. And Tom Knoll, who sends out the notices of the meetings, who has to go through the painstaking process of editing my meeting notices each month. And of course, Gary Keene, my backup, is VP, and Morris Edwards and Art Rosen for signing up what has truly been a remarkable list of speakers over this year so far. So again, thank you to all. And because I think of those efforts is why we will have, I think at the end of this meeting, either 19 or 20, going back to last year, new members added to the Squires. Wish I could get Paul back in here, but anyway. So with that, I think I'm going to turn this meeting over now to Morris Edwards. Morris, wherever you are, so you can introduce our guest speaker.
Thank you, Joe. You know, my screen froze a short while ago. I don't know what happened, but I'm back now just in time. So good afternoon, everybody. It's my pleasure to welcome and introduce our guest speaker, Tom White. So Tom, welcome. I'm glad you could join us today. We're very much looking forward to your presentation. By way of introduction, Tom coordinates the educational outreach for the Cohen Center for Holocaust and Genocide Studies at Keene State College, one of our nation's most prestigious resources for genocide and the Holocaust. Before, Tom taught at Keene High School for 16 years before receiving the fellowship that created his current directors for the Association of Holocaust Organizations. He joins us today to talk about the alarming rise of the Nazis during the 1930s and what we might learn from this attempt to destroy democracy. So Tom, we're ready to proceed. We're looking forward to your presentation. Thank you.
Morris, thank you for the kind introduction. Good to see you again, Joe. Thank you as well for your coordination of today's event. And what I'd like to do is weave our way through how the Nazis came to power and then open up for questions and answers at the end. And so with our fingers crossed, we'll start with a share screen and here we go. And oops, I just put this down. There we go. And so as we begin, I call this the plot to destroy democracy. And what I want to do is trace back some of the forces in play really post-World War I onward that would lead to the remarkable and surprising rise of the Nazis to power. I'm going to be looking at really a couple of things here about how indeed Nazis and this, the kind of rise of extremism that we're looking at today is not a symptom, it's a symptom of democratic decline, not its cause. And as we look at why democracy itself became very unattractive to Germans, a significant question will be is why did 37% of Germans consistently support Nazis, especially from 1932 onward? Contextually, as I look at a map of post-World War I Europe, there are things here that will, I think, echo in our modern world. And so the contextual rise of the Nazis really comes, I think, in an atmosphere where democracy itself was under attack. Indeed, in our own country, some might be familiar with the plot to overthrow FDR in 1933 and replace him with a Mussolini-style dictatorship, of course, failed. But across Europe at the time, you're seeing democracies being replaced by authority and right-wing anti-Semitic dictatorships in countries that are facing similar pressures today of right-wing extremist parties, often brought on by issues of refugees and border insecurity. And of course, places like Yugoslavia no longer exist as a singular entity, but those problems are still there today. And as you look at the countries here, you'll see them, of course, today having the same kind of difficulty. I think the other thing to look at is really how World War I affects the psyche of Europeans. And one begins to wonder, as the Nazis will lie their way to power, why would anybody believe their consistent lying, their need to tell untruths? And I think it is in an atmosphere of sort of this disillusionment after the First World War, this questioning of the idea of progress, which only gave them the machine gun and mass casualties. This contempt for the truth, for reason, for the elites that drove them into the war. And of course, post-war refugee crisis and border insecurity, especially in places like Germany, that only had a 100,000-man army after the Treaty of Versailles. And these are similar pressures, I think, that are acting upon the world and in Europe today as well. And so the Nazis were able to tap into this dissatisfaction, this resentment, and really use cynical dishonesty to sort of play people's fears and give them a different looking future. And the more, I would argue, the more they reject reason, the more they speak in terms that make no sense, the more it made sense to a world that had been ripped apart by the First World War. The other thing to watch, of course, is the rise in paramilitary violence across the spectrum, left, right, and even center in Germany. And in our own country, when you're seeing sort of the rise of paramilitaries, these again are signs of democratic collapse. Looking at Germany, of course, here, I use this map only to illustrate the fact that Germany, of course, is a state since 1871, but really not a nation, still divided when the Nazis come to power. And I would argue, even to this day, when I deal with different Germans from this time period, they still are divided by many different identities. Here you can see different state identities. Of course, you'll have divides that are also religious, Catholic mostly in the South, Protestant mostly in the North. Every region has its own traditions, its own police forces. There's no unified police force. They're all state police forces at this time. Class divisions, all of these different barriers really proscribed your social life, your economic life, your religious, your political life. You would only, of course, go to a certain dinner party with that right type of mixture. And so we'll look at how Germans are socialized into these sort of narrow identities that will have a significant role to play in the rise of the Nazis. It's one of the reasons why the elites, and talking about aristocrats, bankers, the Kaiser himself, pushed Germany into the First World War. The idea was, with industrial revolution and all the inherent dislocation and potential violence that brought, that somehow fighting a war, they would shed blood commonly on the battlefield, and this would unify them. And so in his attempt to sort of unify a really disrupted sort of state here, they pushed him into the First World War. The First World War was fought for, in some cases, similar reasons as the Second. You're going to have militant nationalism fed by anti-Semitism, and you'll see this play out here in a moment. The Kaiser himself, as he declares wars, calls for a truce to the fortress. Let's stop killing each other and let's kill a common enemy. And so this myth of 1914, illustrated by this picture here, that they all marched off in unison as one nation fighting an enemy, is a myth the Nazis will build upon. Now, as we know, that myth is absolutely ridiculous and easily debunked by stories like the Christmas truce of 1914, where you had, I believe, with Southern German troops fraternizing with the British and Scottish troops playing soccer at Christmas time, and them warning the Allied powers that they're being replaced by Prussians, and the Prussians are not going to be interested in fraternizing. So even then, you could see these divisions in Germany that would illustrate that identity issue. When the war ends, one of my favorite artists here, Otto Dix, a survivor of the Western Front, paints the end result of progress as humanity disappears into the muck and mire of the Western Front. And as we're about to get to the big lie that will really spur the Nazi movement and those around them, I want to point out that 85,000 Jews served in the First World War, 70% saw frontline duty. You see the number of medals for bravery, and indeed 18,000 received the Iron Cross for bravery, 12,000 will die. And that's, I think, significant in that the German Jewish population in 1933 was about 500,000 people. So you're seeing a significant, in fact, overwhelming representation of German Jews serving their country in the First World War. Regardless, the big lie, and as we look at big lies and white nationalism, these things stick and have a life of their own. And rather than accepting blame for their own failures, the aristocratic generals, of course, find a scapegoat. And during the war and immediately after, argue that they were stabbed in the back by Jews who refused to serve their country and were interested only in money. So I wanted to give you the facts first before the big lie. The question is, how did this obvious lie, fallacy, gain traction? Looking at the Weimar Republic, here, born out of defeat of the First World War, when it is formed, 3 quarters of the Germans vote for the new coalition government that comes in. The Constitution will have a presidency that you will directly elect for a 7-year term. And from that, the president will then appoint a chancellor. So the chancellor is not voted upon in this Constitution, he's appointed. And most likely the leader of the largest party or the person who can bring a coalition together. There are 3 main, in hindsight, defects to the Weimar Constitution. And that is, there are so many different political parties, each representing its own constituencies. So for example, if you're Catholic from Bavaria, your party is generally the center party, the Catholic Center Party. There's a Bavarian branch to that. But you would never consider voting for any other party. If you're a nationalist, you had, again, a handful of parties, usually at first the Conservative Party, that would then gravitate to the Black Helmet Party, which would then gravitate to the Nazi Party, and so on and so forth. You tended to vote regionally with your own identities, which meant there were upwards of 70 plus political parties in Germany. No one party could ever get a majority, and thus coalition governments were the mainstay. The difficulty here is, with so many political parties and the desire to be democratic, the Constitution allowed for proportional representation. Indeed, if you just ran and got just enough number of votes, you would get representation in the Reichstag, in the parliament. There was no minimum threshold to achieve. Often today you'll have sort of a 5% of the vote threshold. That did not exist. So any radical party can get representation if they just get enough votes in the general election. Article 48, anticipating that the democracy may not work because you have so many people fighting against each other, Article 48 granted the president the right to rule by decree in emergencies. So literally executive orders that have real power. And finally, the army itself, 100,000 men after the First World War, would swear its loyalty oath to the president directly in a military sort of organization here, rather than the Constitution. And that becomes significant later on when President Hindenburg dies and Hitler claims that position. Actually, he kind of combines them. There are 2 presidents in the Weimar Republic. I'm going to skip for time President Hebert and look at, I think, the significant problem, which was President Hindenburg. Hindenburg has a tremendous reputation after the First World War as the hero of Tannenberg, even though it was really Ludendorff, his subordinate, who pulled that victory off. And I think there's a part of him that knows that, and he has this overblown reputation that he's desperate to protect. He very much sees himself as a right-wing militarist conservative. He is not at all in favor of the Republic, even though he's its reluctant president. And his goal is to really unify Germany with a right-wing coalition. Eventually, hopefully, that might get rid of the Republic. He is one of the key authors of the big lie, stab in the back, that Jews had stabbed us in the back. And indeed, in 1916, was part of a army survey that tried to find out how many Jews were serving at the front in the First World War, to find out that most of them were, and so the report was buried. So here, a problematic hero to be, if you would, who is the president of the Republic. In the waning years of the Republic, 1928 to 32, there are 4 different chancellors who will now rule more and more by decree. As we look at the First World War and its impact, we think the war ends in November 1918, but in Germany, the war comes home. And one thing we often miss, I think, is the impact of trauma on decision-making. Trauma, as many of you well know, is beyond simply despair and frustration. It's a sense of pending doom, a pending threat. Even though if the threat isn't visible, it carries over out of the trenches. And so this will shape and amplify attitudes that would lead to warfare on the streets at home. And so as the Republic is being founded, immediately the far left, the Communist Party, rises up and gets slaughtered. And literally you'll have left versus right fighting on the street. Soon thereafter, there's an attempt by the right to seize power, and that's put down as well. So you have this real divisions that are coming to bear as really firefights in the street after the First World War. So the climate politically is very poisonous. The idea to reach across the aisle was considered hypocritical. Indeed, there's a moment where the German Conservative Party, which starts to lose some of its traction in the mid-30s, actually late 20s, reaches out to the left and says, let's work together. And so it's kind of the first move towards some kind of working process of democracy. And the left mocks them. They make fun of them and they say, oh, I thought you were so tough and right-wing militarist. And look at you now kowtowing down to us. So rather than reaching out a hand across the aisle, they belittled them, and the conservatives never made that move again. So this kind of coalition is going to be very, very difficult to sustain. And so these divisions, these identities are much more important than democracy in the early days. So out of this context, we're going to jump ahead to Hitler, who'd been around really since 1919, has failed at everything he's done. And in 1923 decides he's going to try to seize power as these other groups had tried before. It is done in the guise of 1923, where the French have occupied the Ruhr in the western part of Germany, where there are uprisings across the country, where the depression is kicking in as well. And he decides he is going to now try to seize power. Nazi party membership at the time, minor, 55,000 people. Hitler has this urgent need to try to act. The idea was to seize power in Bavaria and then march on Berlin. He's modeling himself after Mussolini, who had just done this on the March on Rome. November 8th and 9th is the beer hall putsch. And literally after a day or so in the beer hall, they decide to leave and march toward the city capital, where in 30 seconds, they're gunned down by combined police and military forces. Hitler himself barely survives. He hides behind a bodyguard who falls dead on top of him. He goes into hiding at a countryside farm where he considers killing himself, and he's finally arrested and put in jail. He quickly gives up his Austrian citizenship. He had crossed the border before the First World War to try to fight for Germany, fearing deportation. So in any stead, this should have been the end of him. But indeed, you had conservative judges who heard him in the trial for treason become very sympathetic. He's talking about unified Germany and the dream of 1914. And while he's in prison, he goes through a transformation. And this is, I think, where we need to begin with Hitler. He will write Mein Kampf, My Struggle, typing it out meticulously. It's mostly a plagiarized and fictional work. He's going to be stealing ideas from Americans, from eugenicists like Madison Grant, from Henry Ford, whose picture remained in his office of the Chancellor almost to the end of the war, of course, who had published in 1920 an anti-Semitic tract, The Protocols of the Elders of Zion in America. And Hitler's going to base much of this on these American writers. His major mental shift here is that you cannot seize power in Germany if the police and the military are shooting at you. You have to do it within the system. And so he's going to systemically now try to get the Nazi Party elected. And then once he gets elected, the plan was then to vote the Weimar Republic out of existence. At first glance, he's a failure here as well. But soon as he starts to rise in prominence, Mein Kampf will make him a millionaire. He'll make a lot of money off the selling of this book. The problem is, once he's in jail and he's writing his tracts and he's trying to figure out what to do, and everything he imagines is in there, the German economy recovers. The Dawes Plan, and then later more contentiously, the Young Plan, starts to rewrite German reparations payment. The Weimar Republic finds its footing. President Hebert and Gustav Stresemann, his foreign minister, begin to reconnect them to Europe. They join the League of Nations. They go to the gold standard, which was sort of the creme de la creme of nations trying to progress. And so when he comes out, it's an entirely different Germany. It's a Germany now that is a little more confident. And when he's released as sort of a Christmas kind of truce in 1924, he immediately comes out and he speaks. He speaks the same treason he spoke before. He's arrested in Bavaria. And again, the Bavarian state says he has no right to speak again. He's inciting violence. That ban will be relaxed by 1927 because Hitler basically goes away in those years. Of great interest, though not for this presentation, the ban only applied to Bavaria, which meant any other state could be ripe for Nazism. And the second Nazi at the time, Gregor Strasser, is really the organizer of the party outside of Bavaria. Meanwhile, in April of 1925, Hindenburg is elected president after the surprising death of President Hebert. They really believed at this point that Hitler was basically a non-entity. The beast is tamed, they believe. Now we can loosen the shackles. And this was the Bavarian Catholic Party who believed the Nazis were rather meaningless. And so if in this brief kind of election look here, you have the beer hall putsch, and you can see that in May of 24, the Nazis poll 6.5% of the vote. By December, they're down to 3%. And the Nazis are banned until 1928. And this becomes the first test of Hitler's new strategy. And you can imagine the tension in the party. You have all kinds of elements that are seeking violent overthrow of the government, and Hitler has convinced them that the way forward is working within the system, trying to get elected. So the first test of his new strategy takes place in May of 1928, and the Reichstag elections are a complete disaster. You'll see the Social Democratic Party polling at about 30%, the largest party. This is the Weimar Republic Party that has created the coalition governments. And you see the Nazis down now to 2.6%. So they have lost any traction they had. And of course, at this point, the party says, should we even follow Hitler anymore? What saves Hitler really is the fact that the Communist Party, the far left, that's also very interested in destroying the Weimar Republic, has come in fourth. This spurs a great fear and reaction amongst Germans that the Nazis can take advantage of. So again, at this stage, late 1928, he's still a failure, but something dramatically is going to change all of that. And the first thing that folks miss is, even though on the national scale they're not doing well, they are doing a little bit better in the state elections, in the Landtag elections. And this is, of course, because of Gregor Strasser, who I mentioned, who's organizing all outside of Bavaria. So you do have momentum here in Germany, but it's relatively small. Everything changes in 1929. And Hitler was a man who benefited from great luck. And the first bit of luck took place in October of 1929 when Gustav Stresemann, the man who sort of moderated all the different nuances, who had brought Germans together, who had really made them part of Europe again with the League of Nations and the gold standard, dies of a stroke. No one expected this. He was the glue for the Weimar Republic, which now leaves a huge void the Nazis could step into. Because, of course, in October, the Wall Street crash. And Germany itself was relying on short-term US loans, which all dry up, and now the economy goes into a free-for-all. The next election cycle, as all this is coming together, is September of 1930, and you're going to see the major difference. Social Democratic Party has lost some of the votes, but look at the Nazi Party. Overnight has emerged as a major party. Now, significantly here in Germany, almost 18–20% of the vote is a significant party, not yet a majority party or plurality party, but they have gained. And the Communist Party have also gained. And so what you're seeing, of course, is the center dissolve in this massive crisis and people looking for whatever solutions. But the two solutions they pick, both are against the Weimar Republic. The scale of the victory surprised Hitler and the Nazis. They had anticipated some success, but not this. And this reinforces that Hitler might be on the right track, that we do this through elections. And especially many of the votes came from the old Conservative Party that now has shifted toward the Nazi Party. So why follow the Nazi Party? Briefly, some thoughts. The Brown Shirts, a private paramilitary army for the Nazis. When you have unemployment of the scale you have here, this gives people a job. It gives them a home. It gives them pride, friendship, comradeship, and purpose. And so the numbers begin to skyrocket of people joining the Brown Shirts. The Nazis are promoting this idea that Germans are all equal, that we're going to go to this 1914 unity, and that class does not matter. Class barriers are significant in Germany. And here was somebody selling a different vision. And so locked into these polarized identities, this idea of unity began to attract especially the young who wanted to build a different type of Germany. So Nazism really becomes a movement of the youth. Gregor Strasser himself, who I've mentioned, is really the key person here, who's been organizing the Nazi Party throughout Germany, and his work starts to pay off. So this is not Hitler who does this, but Strasser. Hitler's ability to suspend all political reality. You know, he was nobody in 1928, but he still believed he would be somebody. And he didn't pull out of politics, and he kept going. And this idea that he himself had all the answers and was almost a new messiah keeps the party moving forward. The Nazi message was consistent. It was entertaining. They used new techniques like science shows and movies, and eventually the airplane. So they come off as sort of a modern, dynamic party. Let's try something new. They would appeal to different groups. They'd form their own clubs for different professions, for doctors, for lawyers, and you created this new social life that Germans are very familiar with. This appeal to emotion rather than reason, I think, is significant in a time where people are traumatized. And he kept talking about attacking the system that put you here. Well, that's vague enough and abstract enough that you can project any fear you have upon the system that the Nazis were going to somehow fix. And just as a brief summary before we kind of wrap this segment up, Hitler is going to be still facing party revolts, those who want to push things much further. After all, they're still not a majority party, so he's going to be killing some of his own members, purging them out, demanding loyalty oaths to different gatherings that are, especially the brown shirts that are rebelling against him. The brown shirted thugs keep beating people up, not yet murdering them because it's still illegal to murder. They'd be put up on trial by state courts. The Nazis start getting elected to the Reichstag. Again, no minimum threshold. And once they get elected, they begin to yell, scream, tease, hoot and holler, and just disrupt all the democratic norms that Germans had become used to. Documents are discovered, both from the 1923 putsch and also from a unit in Boxheim, SA unit, at this time that reveals Nazi plans for mass executions, the guillotine, concentration camps, killing of Jews, and all this becomes public information, especially in the Reichstag. And how does Hitler deal with this? He denies them. He says, this has nothing to do with me. These are local SA units that are making this up on their own. And in that he is barred from speaking to German media, he speaks to the US media, especially the Hearst outlets who are anti-communist. And the idea was to broadcast on American newspapers and radio and make that the primary source that German newspapers would then later quote. And so he really gets this momentum by talking to US journalists. For politicians who knew that this was all true, that Hitler, in fact, was talking in terms of concentration camps and mass murder, they decide to look the other way because they think Hitler can be useful for their own particular projects. And this tended to be the conservative right, who thought we could use Hitler and then discard him when we're done with him. And so in a brief summary here, as we begin to wind this down, President Hindenburg is a key player here. And the reason why he's a key player, as the parliament itself is unable to make any compromise, there is no majority party and coalitions are hard to come by, you now rule by Article 48. When you rule by Article 48 by decree, that means that small circle in and around the president issuing the decrees is where the power lies. And if you can get into that small circle, you will have access to great power. So the key rogue players I'm going to look at here are Kurt von Schleicher, who is a friend of Hindenburg. He's a general who would like to expand the German army, and he will think that the Nazis are the perfect vehicle to restock the German army. Alfred Hugenberg, who is a right-wing media mogul, who himself is a war profiteer, the very thing they're blaming Jews for, had been an early supporter of Hitler, but he's the head of the conservative party that's losing votes to the Nazis. Franz von Papen, who later becomes chancellor, is sort of a nobody. He's a Catholic from Prussia, and he is going to have a significant role to play, of course. And then on the fringe of all of this, people trying to get toward Hindenburg, is Hitler, this Bavarian demagogue from the Nazi party. So Schleicher, his role is the key to undermine German democracy. As a schemer behind the scenes, he's trying to bring together this right-wing coalition that will get rid of the Weimar Republic. And so he's the one who reaches out to the Nazis, to the brown shirts. These are paramilitaries that will number in the millions. They have street cred fighting to their notoriety, and he believes that what he can do is weave them into this resurgent German army when war comes. The goal, of course, is to support them as much as possible. He opens up, for example, the German military arms depots. One of the great misnomers is that Hitler took away people's guns. No, the first thing they did is they flooded the streets with guns. And the idea was to create as much violence as possible because that would undermine the sense of the rule of law and any confidence in democracy. And he tries to recruit the SA away from Hitler. So part of his plan is we'll make them part of the German army, and that will defang Hitler as well in the process. But in so doing all these sort of weird machinations, he's the one who brings Hitler into that circle near Hindenburg. And this will be a great step forward for this guy who was an outsider. He'll get rid of Chancellor Brüning, which will begin this whole process of Weimar unraveling, and replace him with his own puppet, that fellow von Papen, who I mentioned, who was a political nobody. And the idea was that Schleicher would appoint him, he would rule for him, and gradually get rid of the Republic. Hitler, whose policy was gaining power through elections, has gotten some success, but as Schleicher begins to kind of rule the roost here, people begin to wonder, have they gotten as far as they possibly can? Hitler decides to run for president, and he runs against Hindenburg, and he loses. You're going to see here 49.6% to 30.1%. So on the surface, again, even though he's gaining momentum, he's got 11 million votes, he's still a failure, except in the terms of the Weimar Republic, you need to win 50% plus one. Hindenburg came up short, and so you had a runoff election. And in the runoff election, everybody's telling Hitler, just pull out. There's no way that you're going to get 50% of the vote. Hindenburg is so close. What are you doing? And it doesn't make any sense to stand for the runoff because it's going to be humiliating when he loses again. But Hitler is convinced, one, that he's going to lose, but two, that in running, he's going to build up a momentum that will have a huge impact somewhere else. And he's talking about what's going to happen in April, which are state elections, which the Nazis have been organizing for. So he runs really with the clear knowledge he's going to lose. He does something new because the runoff is 1 week. He gets in an airplane and he flies around and he drops into 5 or 6 or 7 cities a day, which has never been done before. And the Nazi appeal, its very name, was appealing to every different political group and asking for votes outside of their normal voting pattern. No other party did that. And in the runoff, Hindenburg doesn't even show up. He lets Brüning, who's about to be dismissed, run the program for him. And Brüning is attracting as big a crowd as Hitler is. And so the big debate, Hitler or Hindenburg, and in the end, they vote for Hindenburg, 53%. He gains more votes. But look at Hitler, because other candidates drop out, you're down to basically a communist, a Nazi, and Hindenburg. So Hitler gains in 1 week 2 million votes. This is significant. This will play out big time in the April state elections. So gaining 2 million new votes, his popularity is rising. He now goes out of his way to praise Hindenburg as the great hero, to try to ingratiate himself with him. On April 24th, those state elections are held and the Nazis do well. They win a plurality in Prussia, which is the largest German state, displacing for the first time the Social Democratic Party. In Bavaria, 32.5%, replacing and tying actually the Catholic Bavarian Party that had a whole lock on the political system there. So great progress at the state level, but you'll notice, of course, no one here is getting the Nazis anything more than 32 or 33%. And hold on 1 second as as we wrap this down, Hitler campaigns in 1932. Now for the later elections, the Nazis become the largest party, getting 37.4% of the vote. And many middle-class people who had voted either for the Social Democrats or the Conservative Party are now flocking to what they will call a protest party. The Nazis maybe can get something done. More than half the deputies in the Reichstag are openly saying they're against Weimar. We need a more radical solution to the country's problems. So the Nazis are taking votes away from the middle conservatives, from the Social Democrats. Hermann Goering is going to start to appear. He becomes the president of the Reichstag because the Nazis become the largest political party. And he is sort of Hitler's fixer who will manipulate things inside the parliament. And with the July 31st victory, the summertime, the brown shirts begin to get very excited. They now, for the first time, begin to kill people. And literally walking into high schools, shooting people who spoke against them. They're actually put on trial. And Hitler comes out and defends them publicly in court trials. And there's this moment where the German public is shocked that Hitler, this guy who they've projected all this stuff on, is actually defending the brown-shirted thugs. Before, we believed it when he said he had nothing to do with them. But why is he defending them? This became very, very problematic, especially among the army, that start to see Hitler as a potential real problem, and they start plotting how to get rid of the Nazis and suppress them if they get any more power. In August of 32, Hitler knowing he now is one of the three main players in politics. He knows that the conservatives have now left the Conservative Party and gathered to the Nazi Party. He knows that everybody needs him to make the right coalition. And he does what he always does. He gambles. He threatens to impeach Hindenburg. He demands to be chancellor. He had at one point agreed with this deal with General Schleicher to support von Papen as chancellor. And now he changes his mind. He says, I'm not going to do that anymore. Schleicher's a little bit worried. He thought he had Hitler kind of boxed into a corner. What is he doing? Because Hitler is now demanding to become chancellor, the idea goes to Hindenburg. So Schleicher now goes to Hindenburg and says, we've been trying to play these guys for our own power, but now Hitler is saying he wants to be chancellor. Hindenburg does not like Hitler at all. At one point, when he first met Hitler, Hitler thought he could convince Hindenburg to name him chancellor, and Hindenburg's immediate response was, you can be postmaster, so that you can lick my you-know-what like you would lick a stamp, is how his first response to Hitler was. And so when Schleicher goes to him and says, my new plan is no longer Papen, but it's going to be Hitler, Hindenburg says, absolutely not. Then he says, how about a vice chancellorship for Hitler? Hindenburg says, are you out of your mind? I will never work with this guy. Schleicher, of course, has to tell Hitler the bad news that he's not going to be named chancellor. August 13th, Hindenburg summons Hitler. And listen, Hitler, you're threatening to impeach me. You are threatening to unleash the brown shirts in a civil war if you don't get your way. He publicly dresses down the common soldier from the field marshal. Hitler flies into a shocking rage. He publicly now spews massive anti-Semitism. It shocks the German public. And indeed, this rejection by Hindenburg is almost devastating for him. So he's gotten 37% of the vote. He seems to be on momentum, and it now seems to have hit a wall. His followers are confused. What are you doing? Why did you push Hindenburg into a place where he would condemn you? Why is the army now trying to organize to stop you from coming in? So there's a revolt within the party itself. The brown shirts up their rampage. They kill more people. They're mad at both the establishment for blocking Hitler, and they're mad at Hitler for choosing a legal path. They do not believe that's going to work, and they want violence to overthrow the Republic. Hitler blames Schleicher for all of this. If you just made me chancellor, then none of this would have happened. And Hitler never forgets a slight. He'll have Schleicher assassinated in 1934. Meanwhile, Papen, who had become the chancellor, this figurehead chancellor with Schleicher's direction, is now mad at Schleicher. What are you doing? I thought I was your chancellor. What are you doing siding with the Nazis? So those key players around Hindenburg start to fight each other, which is going to create an opening for Hitler. Papen goes to the Reichstag and tries to rule by decree, and they laugh him out. In fact, the Communist Party that's interested in getting rid of Weimar calls for a vote of confidence against Papen's government. The Nazis, who are also interested in getting rid of Weimar, vote with the communists against Papen to try to get rid of his government. So Papen, in this overwhelming vote of no confidence, has to call new elections for November of 1932. So it really appears that Hitler has maneuvered here to really become now maybe chancellor in this situation. But what happens next is very surprising. That does not happen. In fact, where is he? He has disappeared momentarily off the scene. And oh, my screen just went a little bit crazy here. Get rid of that there. So with that in mind, a couple of things happen here. Oh, and my screen is frozen suddenly. The campaign itself begins to falter. The venues are only half full. The middle class votes that had basically followed him in July are now disappearing. They're going back to their normal constituents. And then in August, at the height of the campaign, he disappears for a few days. And where is he? Well, Eva Braun, his new secret girlfriend, he was often hunting down and dating teenage girls, each of whom commit suicide in the previous years. Eva herself has tried to kill herself. And Hitler, very worried this would affect his political career if people found out he was dating someone and that someone tried to commit suicide, like the two teenagers he had dated before, goes back to her bedside and pledges loyalty to her. But this is the height of the campaign. And people are wondering, where is Hitler? Without Hitler at the helm for a few days, the Nazi Party actually sides with the communists again to try to get rid of Weimar, which confuses everybody. I thought they didn't like the communists. And when the elections come out in November of 32, the Nazis have lost 2 million votes. The same 2 million votes they had gained in the presidential runoff, they've lost them. And people are raising significant questions about who Hitler is and what the Nazi Party is on about. November 19th, Hitler walks away from an offer from Hindenburg to become chancellor. Hindenburg, I'm not sure if he was serious. I think he was sort of rubbing it in, saying, how would you like to become chancellor? But if you are chancellor, the cabinet must be from the different parties in the Reichstag. And he knew Hitler would never accept that, and he didn't. And on December 1st, Schleicher himself says, I would like to be chancellor, and he replaces Papen. Hindenburg backs his friend, fellow General Schleicher, and Schleicher gets what he's always wanted. He thinks he's chancellor, and he thinks he's getting rid of the Nazis and Papen, and all looks well. The Nazi Party's in full decline. Party members are now questioning Hitler's strategy and even his competence. Where was he during the campaign? On December 4th, they try to save face by pouring what remaining, remember, these are elections that have taken place all throughout the year, and they've run out of money. And so they pour them into one of these local elections in Thuringia, and they lose. And this had never happened on the state level for at least a couple of years. And so the whole party begins to unravel. They're almost bankrupt. They begin to turn on each other. The brown shirts get more restless. They start doing their thing. And it looks like really the Nazis are done for, especially when the economy begins to recover. The policies of Weimar are now starting to pay off again. Political parties, seeing the tea leaves here, are saying, we better cooperate with each other rather than let the Nazis take over. And Hitler, seeing all this, actually considers, again, killing himself. So this is the fall of 1932. Hitler becomes chancellor in January of 33. So what happened? Quickly, here we have about 2 slides left. Opportunity, he just lucks out. In December of 1932, Hitler faces a major revolt within the party led by Gregor Strasser, who tries to replace Hitler and tries to side with a new Schleicher government. Strasser is put down. Indeed, Hitler says to the party, if you go with Strasser, I will kill myself. He probably doesn't mean it now, but the party is guilted into siding with Hitler again, and this revolt is put down. The brown shirt revolt, another brown shirt revolt takes place. He puts that down, asks for loyalty oaths from the brown shirts, and he gains back this kind of momentum. And as December winds down, Hitler is now the sole leader of the party. There are no rivals. The brown shirts are still intact, looking for a fight. And Hitler is still indispensable to the conservative plotters who are trying to get rid of Weimar because they still think he's a significant political player who can form some kind of coalition with us. Chancellor Papen, former Chancellor Papen turns on Schleicher. Schleicher, of course, has replaced Papen, and he turns on Papen, and so now Schleicher and Papen, who had been allies, are now enemies. And in turn, each looking for their power base turns toward Hitler. So Papen says, hey, Hitler, how would you like to get even with Schleicher for what he did to you? Schleicher goes to Hitler and says, I know you don't like Papen, why don't you work with me? And so Hitler is becoming the key power broker as to what was going to happen next. The amazing thing about my life, he confessed, is that I'm always rescued just when I myself have given up. And that's very true. He almost killed himself. And so January 33, the debate really rages between Schleicher and Papen. Hitler is still there, but he's not the key player. And Hitler is rescued once again from his failures. And this is January 4th. Papen meets with Hitler secretly to offer him the chancellorship. And Hitler, now having just lost 2 million votes, facing party revolts, anxious to save himself, accepts the offer to be a vice chancellor with Papen in the coming government. Remember, Schleicher is the chancellor at the time, so this is backdoor plotting. The brown shirts are ordered back on the streets. They gain some confidence, some momentum here. And on January 22nd, Hitler meets with Hindenburg's son, Oskar von Hindenburg, in a series of secret meetings. And Hindenburg himself begins to sort of look at Hitler as the solution to all the stuff that's confusing for him. And he will then go to his father and champion Hitler to President Hindenburg. Papen himself, as he organizes a revolt against Chancellor Schleicher, is supported by a lot of money. The industrialists, the bankers, even the army, because the army is sort of turning on Schleicher. Schleicher is talking about things like maybe we should share the property of the wealthy with the poor in this time of economic crisis. And the conservatives wanted nothing to do with that. And they begin to turn on Schleicher themselves. On January 28th, Schleicher is forced to resign. Hindenburg asked for his resignation. As his aristocratic friends say, he's not taking our land. But Schleicher, really keen on keeping Papen out, sides with Hitler. So now Schleicher goes to Hindenburg and says, you ought to pick Hitler. Papen goes to Hindenburg and says, what about Hitler? And Hitler's doing nothing here except acting as sort of the middleman. Schleicher's last act is the one that will save the German economy. He will pass a $500 million public works program that will end up employing 2 million Germans that the Nazis will claim credit for, but it was really what happened just before with Schleicher. And so as all these tensions are building, as Papen is fighting Schleicher and so on and so forth, a small group meets to announce who they will suggest to be the next chancellor to Hindenburg. Everybody expects out of this meeting that Papen will be renamed chancellor and to sort of placate all the conservative nationalists. Hugenberg, who was the former leader of the Conservative Party, will be his vice chancellor. That's what everybody expects. However, both are deeply unpopular. Papen, who had been voted out by a vote of no confidence just earlier, Hugenberg, who's been losing all the votes of the Nazi Party, people think neither one of these guys are the solution. The army begins to plan a coup. If there's a Papen-Hugenberg chancellorship, the army is going to step in. And so what does Hitler do? Hitler ups the ante and he says, the only way out of this dilemma is to make me chancellor. And Papen considers his options. If I become chancellor, there's going to be a military takeover. But if I side with Hitler, who's basically an amateur who just lost 2 million votes, I can control him because I'm smarter than he is. And I can basically use him to save my own hide. As the negotiations go on, and I'll just as we wrap this up here, it's January 30th, 1933. It's 11 o'clock in the morning. Hindenburg is waiting for this group to tell him what the new cabinet will be and who he should recommend to be the new chancellor. At 11:15, Hugenberg, who hates Hitler for having stolen all the votes in the previous elections, refuses to back Hitler as chancellor. And so literally an argument breaks out as they leave the office to walk up the stairs to go talk to the president about who they're going to recommend. In that walking up the stairs moment, Hitler begs and pleads, it's pathetic, with Hugenberg to say, listen, I really am your friend. If you back me, all will be well. And Hugenberg backs down. And in one last miscalculation that the next day he'll say he made a huge mistake, he decides as they approach the door to Hindenburg's office to support Hitler. So this is how close it was. It had nothing to do really with Hitler's brilliance. It had to do with these other calculations. Even so, when they open the door, go in the meeting, the leader of the Black Helmet Party, which is a right-wing nationalist conservative group, changes his mind and says, no, you know what? Hitler's a thug and I can't support Hitler. And in that meeting, Papen pleads with him and says, no, I swear he'll be good and nice to you and he serves your interest. And they back down and they also then in the meeting support Hitler. And to everybody's surprise, Hitler is named chancellor that afternoon. And Hitler, as he's now given the reins of government, whispers to his friends, the main thing right now is to win over the old fool, meaning Hindenburg, so that he believes that I am the man for the job. Here, Hitler was a defeated man, and then he was given victory. And the history of Hitler is to underestimate him, because now, once he is given power, on January 30th, 1933, everybody thought that he was basically a buffoon who they were using for their own conservative agenda, and they would soon overthrow the Weimar Republic. And Papen believed he was the guy in charge, and he convinced Hindenburg to back Hitler because he told him, I have Hitler well boxed in. He's an amateur. There's nothing he can really do. And there was some truth to that because most of the cabinet here weren't Nazis. Only 2 of them were, which was, of course, Wilhelm Frick, a former parliamentarian who'd been saying since 1924 that when we come to power, we're going to put all of you in concentration camps. And he meant it. He becomes the Minister of the Interior or of the police. And with that portfolio is Hermann Goering, the president of the Reichstag, Hitler's fixer, who is head of the Prussian police force, which is 2/3 of the police in Germany. In fact, the Prussian police force itself rivals in size the German army. So these are 2 real significant players. Meanwhile, the conservatives around him can stop Hitler if they want to. They choose not to. They actually back all of his initial moves to get rid of the Weimar Republic. Hitler has access now to all the systems of power, can implement whatever goals he wants. And right away he says, I'm going after the Jews. This was never a hidden agenda for him. And finally, Hindenburg urges Hindenburg to run one last election. He tells him this will be the last election in Weimar. It's going to be in March. And because I will control government, you're going to see the Nazi Party will win a majority of the votes. And now we can vote out the Weimar Republic. Hindenburg is on board. Election is going to be called for March. And that's where I would leave us, because all the different things that were in place to oversee Hitler, from the army to the bureaucrats to Hindenburg, who could have fired Hitler at any time, all of them decide to back Hitler in an attempt to have a right-wing coalition overthrow the Weimar Republic. He was going to be their tool. But of course, he never gave the power back. And instead, the conservatives around Hitler back the dismembering of the Weimar Republic. Within the first week, no more judicial oversight. In the first month after the Reichstag fire decree gives Hitler temporary dictatorship power. And that immediately allows him to then take over all the different states and coordinate them under his leadership. The first concentration camps emerge in the 8th week, publicly here, Oranienburg in Berlin and Dachau outside of Munich. At the same time, the Enabling Act is passed through Parliament through very nefarious means, of which we really won't get into here. But with the Enabling Act, Hitler now has the legal power to pass whatever laws he wants. So in the 3rd month, equality for the law is removed, anti-Jewish decrees and purges begin. Labor unions are suppressed, which gives him the backing of the industrialists. The Social Democratic Party, the main party of Weimar, is also abolished. And by the 5th month, all parties are disbanded, and the Nazi Party is the only party left. I give you that brief summary as we wrap this up, because you can see how rapidly this conservative agenda in Germany could unravel the Weimar Republic. It just took 5 months. Some resisted. Many Germans try to resist, especially during the Enabling Act proceedings in Parliament. They don't succeed. And about 1.6 million will join the Nazi Party by spring. And on July 14th, the Nazis declare themselves the only legal political party, also announced the first race sterilization laws that are based on US sterilization laws. And significantly here, July 14th, Bastille Day, they are positioning themselves as an anti-enlightenment, anti-equality party. They are now a racist party that stands in opposition to the Enlightenment. Today, if you go to Berlin and the Reichstag that burned down in February of 1933, the Germans have made this sort of cupola above it. And the Nazis are themselves shocked by how much they could accomplish in the first 4 or 5 months of being given power. And indeed, where at Christmas time, they're all sort of celebrating that Hitler had been defeated. By the time Christmas comes and rolls through, kids are now asking for Nazi uniforms in their Christmas stockings. Immediately, anti-Jewish signs go up, and the Nazis are shocked by how quickly this could happen. For Germans today, symbolically, this is free. You go in, you can walk up and around and look down upon the parliamentarian's desk. And the idea here is that every German citizen is invited to go in and look down upon their legislators to make sure they aren't cutting these backroom deals that led them to the Nazis. And I think it's a great way to move forward symbolically, look at the past. And so that's my quick overview of how the Nazis came to power. And what I wanted to highlight there, really, that Hitler's belief that he could do this is what's spurring a lot of this. His destruction of dissenters within the party was important, but most important were the backroom plotters who thought they could use Hitler for their own advantage. And that's why I wanted to leave.
Outstanding. Wow.
Wow. Yeah.
Thank you, Tom.
You're
Fascinating,
welcome, Morris.
fascinating narrative. Wow. I don't see any hands up yet for questions. Are there any questions? Yes, there, Mike. You have to unmute yourself. Oh,
Yeah. Yeah, so what a fantastic presentation, first of all. Thank you so much. In looking back, really at the start of your presentation, which, I mean, you can see so many parallels with what's going on globally and certainly in this country. I don't know if you're familiar with Colin Woodward's book, America's Nations, but the parallels between the German nation states, if you will, and what Colin Woodward talks about in his book about America's nations, it brings so many parallels that I never realized. Could you expand on that a little bit, Tom?
Yeah, I think I'm not familiar with the book, but I just wrote it down, and I will familiarize myself with the book. But I think some significant similarities and differences. And when you do this comparative work, it's important to show the contrast. I think one of the significant differences is that the German left itself never unified in any kind of resistance to Hitler. The German left, the Communist Party, for example, was in opposition to the Social Democrats and other liberal parties. They fought each other, and they could never coordinate. The clear difference in contrast is what happened in France in 1934. In France, the French left unified against a right-wing coup to overthrow the French government. And in fact, this was even more popular in the French countryside than even in Paris. And the French left held, and it doesn't hold in Germany. A second difference, I would say, is if you look at America, for example, and you have all these different Americas competing with each other. One of the main differences, perhaps, is we have significant minorities, and I would argue a significant minority, Black Americans, who stand in the way of this kind of undermining of law. And the Nazis did not have to face a unified bloc of opposition like our own minorities provide in our country. And so that, I think, would be a big difference as well.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Paul, you have a question?
I do. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. That was superb. And the parallels with today are very frightening, frankly. My question is, early in in the beginning of your talk to us, you spoke of an attempt to overthrow FDR. And in my perhaps limited reading, I thought that the FDR saw the threat coming from the communists. Are you saying that there was a right-wing attempt to basically?
There was. It has two names. It's either the bankers plot or the Wall Street bankers plot. And the plot was basically launched by industrialists who were calling the New Deal the Jew deal. And we're calling FDR the new socialist dictator, referencing him to Hitler, which is now our long political tradition to call every one of our leaders the next Hitler. And it's actually backed by the American Legion at the time. And the problem was that the general they picked, who was this two-time Medal of Award winner, when they recruited him to lead the coup, he blew the whistle because he was a patriot. It really becomes sort of suppressed because there were so many in Congress that backed the plot. Remember, you're talking about what I think 24 senators are members of the Klan. The people who wrote the immigration law in 1924 were members of the Klan. And they're working with eugenicists in this racial stuff that Nazis are into. So they suppress their collusion with this plot. So it really doesn't become public until Sinclair Lewis discovers it. And he writes this book that's now being quoted everywhere. This book about this guy named, what is the name? He has this really bizarre name of this guy who comes to power and he becomes like Hitler. But he's basing that entire book on this banker's plot that had been suppressed. So this is a right-wing coup that never really comes to happen because the plotter himself reveals it to, I believe, the FBI and others, and it stopped in its tracks. But the idea was they wanted FDR to become sort of a temporary dictator because they never believed democracy could actually save the country. And of course, that's the great lesson. Comparing FDR to Hitler, democracy wins. And FDR works within Congress to do New Deal legislation. The problem, of course, he has to do it with Southern Democrats. And the Faustian bargain for FDR to save democracy was to reinforce Jim Crow. So as the New Deal was passed, all that money went to white schools, white buildings. It was administered at the state level in the South. And that was the only way they passed the legislation. So FDR had to maneuver, do I work within democracy? And if I do, I have to work with Southern Democrats to make that happen. And that was the bargain, but he saved democracy at the same time.
Thanks, Tom. Any other questions? I don't see anything, no hands raised on the participants. Any other questions? If you can wave your hand. I don't see anybody. No questions? Okay, Tom, well, I thank you so much for your wonderful presentation. So glad you could be with us today. And Joe, do you want to take over?
Yes, I'd like to just echo Morris's comments. I really enjoyed that, Tom. Thanks again.
You're welcome. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah.
Thank you.
That was fabulous.
So before we adjourn, however, I'd like to call on Art Rosen to tell us what next month's talk is going to be about. Are you there, Art?
Speaker will be Keith Coughlin. Keith is the artistic director of the New London Barn Theatre, and he will tell us about creative plans and building plans, as well as how the whole COVID-19 matter has affected the barn. It should be very topical, very interesting. We look forward to it.
Thanks, Art. Lastly, I promised that we would kind of get an update for you from where we think we're going as an organization. So at this time, without further ado, I'd like to call on Paul Etkind, who's agreed to bring us up to speed on his thoughts about when we'll be able to meet in person, et cetera.
Thank you, Joe. And again, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So briefly, we're in a very rapidly evolving situation. Our vaccine supplies are increasing. Eligibilities for the vaccine are opening perhaps sooner than expected. The percentage of those receiving at least one dose of vaccine in the adult population of the US is now almost 1 in 5. It's just under 19%. And over almost 100 million doses have been administered, 95.7 million doses. And currently we're administering 2.1 million doses each day. We're on quite a pace here. So in New Hampshire, at least 20% of the adult population has received at least one dose. We're making quite very, very good progress after a sort of stuttering start. I want to emphasize it is absolutely essential that we continue to be vaccinated, that those who have not been vaccinated seek it out at the soonest possible opportunity. Viral variants are quite worrisome, and we don't want to give them a chance to develop beyond the protection of the current vaccine. So the sooner we can get a larger portion of the population immunized, the better off we'll be. As you've seen in the news, CDC is easing its restrictions on fully vaccinated people, saying, yes, you can get together with your family, hug your grandchildren. Vaccinees can get together in small groups for social events of various kinds, and quarantine restrictions are also being waived. There are some serious unknowns that continue to remain. You've heard these before. I spoke of it last month, and it's always in the news. Those who have been vaccinated are protected from the virus, but it's still, we don't have significant data to really fully answer the question of whether or not a vaccinated person can successfully spread the virus to others. And as that is true, it's important that we continue with not only trying to become vaccinated, but also we keep our habits, and we keep the habits of masking, social distancing, and washing hands. Those have to remain important for everyone. They have to remain, they have to remain in place if we're going to succeed here. As the percent of people who are vaccinated increases, you will see the CDC in the States, and for those of you who are at Eastman, the public health team at Eastman will be constantly reviewing the guidelines and amending them when they deem appropriate. We are looking at the rules regarding the use of amenities and how vaccination will change those rules. And that's including the use of the restaurant as well as the tavern portion of the restaurant. I know in many minds, when will we be able to resume in-person lunches? And let me start answering that question by saying, I personally am not in a position to promise you anything, and I am, as a person, not able to deliver anything. But in the spirit of under-promising and over-delivering, I think that probably not until sometime in the summer or the autumn. That's my sense right now. We meet weekly, we discuss this weekly, we look at what's the latest that we know from the data, what's recently been published. Our members have connections within CDC and NIH, and so we're pretty well tuned in to what the decision makers are thinking about. And as things change, you will learn because we'll get the word out as swiftly as we can. Thank you, Joe.
Okay, thank you, Morris. I appreciate it. So, Paul, sorry, Paul.
Don't be sorry. That's somewhat of a compliment.
Well, anyway, thanks again for your update. So unless there's any other new business, I'd like to call for an adjournment of this meeting. And again, thanks to all who participated, and especially our speaker. And Tom White, it was an outstanding presentation. And I will be putting out the recorded link, Tom, for any of those of us who may have missed it, or for anybody else who would like to share that. So thanks again. And with that, I think we've concluded this meeting, and we'll see you next month.
Hi, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Take care.
I think I know what that is.
Good show. Thank you.